Welcome to Seen and Heard podcast, where everyone should be seen and heard. And both of my hosts in tonight, Chrissy and Charles.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hi.
We can't see you, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and play this video. Hold on, I got to take this off. But I'm going to play this to open us up for our show, which we'll be talking about beef, and we'll be talking about men not knowing what to do. They're crying about not knowing what to do. And we're going to talk about Biden and his announcement and the government and Marxism. So let me play this video.
Deserving much better than being, overshadowed by David Choe's history.
Please watch that creator's entire breakdown of the situation with the Netflix show Beef and co-star David Choe. And what I wanted to cover is that if there are people who feel that Beef deserved better than to be tanked by the history of David Choe, then recognize that's on Netflix and the production to not cast him in the first place. I only watched part of one episode and I don't plan to watch anymore, so I wouldn't know. But I don't believe that they didn't know about the podcast and they wanted him involved. They wanted his aesthetic. So they prioritized having him involved on a project that was going to represent Asian Americans at the expense of the dignity and safety of Black women. And if my understanding is correct, of Black girls. And I feel like I covered this to a much lesser extent with respect to Aquafina. Yes, I support Asian Americans in the arts and media, because we don't have a lot of representation. I didn't know about the podcast, and because David Choe collaborates with Upper Playground and I really like Upper Playground, I was sad to hear about it. But no, I'm not going to support his art because I don't prioritize representation of Asian Americans when it comes at the expense of other marginalized groups. And I think there are much needed conversations about how anti-Blackness is so deeply ingrained in the United States that there are some Asian Americans who feel that it's okay to jump on that bandwagon and not recognize it as harmful, or recognize it as harmful and not care. But right now, no conversations are being had because the production and co-stars and David Choe are stonewalling. And I know that Ali Wong is not the one who engaged in the behavior firsthand, but her setting her social media to private feels like when Aquafina set her social media to private when being called into account for cultural appropriation. It feels like saying that we're not going to acknowledge this is going on and we're not going to have this conversation. If you didn't know, say that you didn't know. If you knew but you didn't care, then yes, you have to face accountability for that. If you knew and you thought that there were mitigating reasons that made it okay, then say what those reasons are. Some people are saying that they thought his reputation had been sufficiently rehabilitated because he had a show in the intervening time. Some people are saying that he made a statement that he didn't do those things. I feel like that statement is not sufficient. It was all about his concern about his reputation and dismissing it as bad performance art, but not about recognizing the harm. But as long as we deal with these things by pretending they don't happen and refusing to have the conversation, what we are showing Black people is that we as Asian Americans are not safe. And that's not okay with me.
I don't want to say anything about this show Beef because of the fact that they knowingly cast David Choe, who bragged in 2014 about essaying a Black woman. I really don't care if he is now running around telling people that it was a fake story. Because the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, he has profited now multiple times from violence against Black women. Misogynoir is misogyny specifically against Black women that continues to dehumanize them. As Asian Americans, we can't support that because historically, anti-Blackness has always been a problem in the Asian American community. Part of understanding anti-Blackness in the Asian American community is understanding also the myriad of ways in which we become complicit. And that includes supporting the art, the creation of media that lifts up Asian lives and voices over and against that of Black lives. And while the show and its content may not have done that, the show and its decision, the show and the showrunners in their decision to cast David Choe, knowing his history and what he has done, makes it a problem and makes it complicit in misogynoir. And I'm never going to support that. And I hope you don't either.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think they pretty much said it. I think it's important that that Asian Americans, be clear and explicit about, um, in the case of Aquafina, the exploitation of, of Black mannerisms and art forms, and in this case, I'm trying to figure out what happened, because the only way I know David Choe is through Joe Rogan's podcast, because I know he did some sort of TV series or where he traveled throughout Africa and did did like really interesting stuff with tribes and things like that. So I'm wondering, where did he come across a 14-year-old masseuse, if not Africa? That's what I want to know, because I can't imagine anywhere in the United States would have a 14-year-old masseuse. So this may have happened in Africa. So I don't know. In which case, for example, some countries don't have an age of consent, or a very young. Not that that makes it okay to sexually assault someone. I just mean maybe that's how they can be involved in those kinds of trades. I don't know, what the circumstances are, but at any rate, yeah. The So he told that story in 2014 on a podcast, and then the very next day came out and said, "Oh, it was just a joke. I made up that story." So, and the podcast that it was on is a very explicit one. The host, I mean, the podcast itself is called something like double vaginal, double anal penetration, something. I mean, that's so, the nature of the podcast is to elicit salacious and crude and you know over the top sexual something. Again, all of that is very kind of frat humor. I don't really get it, and I don't get that kind of humor anyway, but it's very sort of locker room type of thing. um, you know
It
so
was extremely, like I said, when it first happened, I was, seeing, because I hadn't seen Beef, but I was like, okay, what I always do is just go investigate myself because I was seeing people's comments. I say, well, let me go look at this video myself and hear for context. Well, I was not prepared for what I heard. Now, as far as like crude jokes and things like that, I'm not a total prude. But I'm adult enough to feel like if it's something that I don't think is funny, I'll just turn it off or switch channel or whatever. But I definitely wasn't prepared for what I heard
yeah,
and the
this goes
way I
beyond
heard
that.
it.
The joke he said was, I feel like I'm kind of a rapist or something like that, and
He
then
said
they
he was
joke
a
back and forth about being
successful
that.
rapist. He said he was a
Yeah, and
successful.
then he
Yeah.
said the thought of going to jail made me have an erection. He's like, oh, so now you're saying that unless you're raping, it's not funny, So that was the exchange that happened about that. So
Yeah, yeah, it's really, really explicit. But then
it's all been taken down, but there are snippets still circulating on TikTok. So they are being scrubbed.
Mhm.
Apparently on Twitter, it may or may not be being in the process
Yeah,
of being scrubbed right now. So
there are
there
a
seems to
few
be a lot
left
of
on
support
Twitter,
for the
but
show.
all I can suggest is if anybody wants to hear it for themselves, I'm not playing it here. You can go listen to it for yourselves. But I will tell you, trigger warning, especially if you are a victim of any form of assault
Survivor.
or anything like that. Yeah. So extreme trigger warning there. But the fallout from that though was what was also triggering with the people that were still willing to support him. And then it took how long it took the Netflix people to respond because even they responded for Ali Wong and Stephen and Allie still haven't really responded. So the people
And this is
responded
going
to
to ruin their careers too, and both of them are on the upswing. So
them.
you know, you got to get ahead of these things.
And well, and then they're still really not acknowledging it, which I mean, that's on them. I mean, they could do what they want because I equally could not support anything that they do. Like but it's really disappointing that and then like, people were wanting to bring up the Jonathan Majors thing. Well, I'm not a fan of Jonathan Majors either. I don't watch anything Jonathan Majors is in or Ezra Miller. They equally need to be held responsible for whatever it is they did. I believe. You know what I'm saying? Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't support anybody. Ezra is what European, and Jonathan Majors is a black man. Okay, no, they need to be held responsible. I don't support none of that from anybody.
Yeah. And it's crazy just the fact to say, oh, it was a joke. Well, they always say there's truth in every joke. So
Hmm. And then the
how far
idea
from the truth was it?
right. And then the
Yeah.
idea that black women are all what are still at the bottom rung. Yes, we're beautiful. Yes, we've been accomplished, and we're not playing victim. But things like that, the anti-blackness and the
Mhm.
violence against black women as a so-called that's not cute.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, there he is. Okay. Yeah, so that's not cute. It coming from anybody's community, and you see, like we have issues from the black men in the black community, the white man. I mean, we getting it. Black women especially are getting it from everybody in every community.
It's like every which
So
way you turn.
this is not cute. It's exhausting because we got to deal with enough in this raggedy country. I'm tired of it. Oh, Charles, when you went out for a little bit, so I was uh, saying that people were also trying to compare the David Cho thing to Jonathan Majors and Ezra Miller. I don't care. Black, white, Asian, it's not cute. The anti-blackness and the violence towards black women,
With
especially.
Jonathan Majors, I don't know. It's a lot of he said, she said. Apparently, she's recanted. It's this white lady, and you know, yeah, I think his mistake was dating the white lady, but other than that, it might be completely fraudulent. So,
Because they were showing videos of her going out afterwards, after the alleged incident
well,
supposedly
and
happened also.
apparently the witnesses at the place said that it was the opposite, that she was the one being abusive to him.
Mm.
So,
Which I believe that too, because I mean, look at what happened to Tony Obumseli.
yeah, exactly. Has she been charged in that case? Do you know?
Yeah, she got charged, but
But with what, manslaughter, something minor?
she got a minor. Of course, she got a minor charge, but yeah, I mean, she was free for a while, and then they arrested her, rearrested her. She was
Good.
in her jail uniform or whatever for a while, but I haven't really followed up on that because
Uh,
I could care less about Tony
I
Obumseli
mean,
or any.
it's maybe not our place to say, but
Uh,
it's getting to the point where it's becoming so cliched. Back in the BET stand-up comedy days in the '90s, there was the jokes about, oh yeah, a black man makes a little bit of money, he goes and gets his white wife. Now it's become almost standard, almost like I don't know.
well, believe it or not,
It's
it's always
become
been standard. I mean, it goes
it's
all the way
the
back
the
to.
the level of uniformity now is astounding. I mean, I at this point I can't name a prominent black man that isn't. I'm sorry. It's getting that over the top. It's becoming quite ridiculous.
Well, it's a
And then you
perk.
hear the stories about Martin Luther King Jr.
Yep. Harry
So
Belafonte, he was another one because Eartha Kitt.
his second wife,
Yeah,
was white. Yeah.
the Eartha Kitt
For
made
that
a
matter,
yeah.
Bob Marley, that Turn
Yep,
Your Lights
Bob
Down Low,
Marley.
that was written for
Hmm.
a white Miss Jamaica.
I mean, we can go all the way back to Frederick Douglass.
Is that
Because
right?
yes, Frederick Douglass, as soon as he was able to, he fought
Mm.
for the right to marry a white woman. Yes, we can go all the way back to
So
Frederick Douglass.
I, I don't know what to say. It's just, but every man of black men, Latino men, Asian men, they just they have this I don't know, this bizarre fetishization of white women. It's really, it's just, look, a certain percentage of it can be attributed to, media depictions, uh, but
I personally,
how could it be that thorough?
well, look, I
If it was
personally
just
believe,
media influence, it wouldn't be so robust, so
well,
uniform.
it's business because look at, just hear me out. Look at the all of the, for example, the black athletes. Okay, so that's a given, like, so they get their contracts, and behind the scenes, which I've heard other black men spill the beans on it, it doesn't get a lot of airplay, but they say behind the scenes, specifically those white owners, the white corporatists, the same with the rappers in the music industry, the white people behind the scenes say, you sign the contract, we'll give you access to all these white women, all these preferences, or whatever. So that's part of the contract as well. So insidiously enough, how that's how they keep the money in the white community. And that's how the white men keep their power, because those black men are going to go with the preferences in the white women, keep the money in the white community. It doesn't go into the black community to build up the black community. It
And
stays in the white community.
when that happens, and you got this false allegation that you beat her up and all this other stuff, ain't nobody gonna feel bad for you.
Nope.
Yeah,
And that
Or
money
when,
that's
is
kind of,
going to stay in the
or when
I
white
think
she,
that's kind
community.
of what happened. I
you
think
know,
that's kind of what's happening.
or
Like,
when
what
she
were you
goes and
doing? Messing with the devil woman.
yeah, I mean, when they snap and they kill you, now you want the black community to stand up and protest for you. I'm sorry, no.
Nope.
Like, for why? You know,
It's been gone.
Yeah,
kindness for what? For
but my
why?
concern there
Mhm.
is not that a black man or a black person, whatever, was victimized. Just that if you're a skinny, pretty, boob job blonde girl, it's the Trump thing of I can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. So she can. You got to understand, stabbing someone to death, it's not easy to do. That's why you hear about people getting stabbed 30, 40, 50 times, because if you don't get something critical, you're not going to die.
And that's personal.
You've
Yeah,
got to
very.
yeah, and it's so personal. Yeah. So it's a particularly vicious way of killing someone. It's very
Hmm.
intimate. It's
Yeah.
very disturbed. And I don't think people fully appreciate white rage. And it's just something we don't talk about.
Speaking of white rage, because while we're on the subject of the men and relationships as well, uh, I was following a thread where it was a white lady that posted it. So I'm following this thread where we were talking about earlier, where men are whining and complaining about women not wanting to deal with them, and then it comes into these no fault divorces and stuff like that. Well, this lady in particular wrote a thread about how, well, guys, no fault divorce should be illegal. Hey, you know what a lot of women did in the past when they weren't allowed to divorce terrible men? They murdered them. Be grateful you're just whining on the internet
Mhm.
and not serving as hog chow. So this white
Yeah.
lady is basically,
Good.
the whole thread is
Re-
basically
Look,
talking about how
this
women
is
killed
okay.
men.
Look, women were not allowed to have bank accounts and get mortgages until, Sharon, our grandparents,
Yes.
in the 70s, is
Hmm.
when they were allowed to open a checking account on their own.
Hmm.
This is not long ago. I was
I
alive
know.
at that time. Okay.
We
So
were little kids.
yeah, so it's wild and that's why every time I hear one of these questions, why don't you think marriages last as long as our grandparents' generation? I think the question itself is it's ignorant at best, if not brutal. They
Mhm.
weren't allowed to.
Mhm.
There was only one way out, like you said, murder. I want to point out it was the city of New York that pioneered at the turn of the century in the early 1900s that pioneered this notion of having a coroner. Now, this is an important development of what we take for granted today. Okay,
Mhm.
because back in the day, you used to be able to pay the guy off to declare the cause of death to be whatever you wanted, and they estimate that the level of poisonings that were just so commonplace at the time, like you said, these women couldn't divorce their way out of an abusive situation, so they just poisoned their fucking husbands. So, oh, here we go. Do they talk about the history of it?
Yes, its precise number of
There you
victims
go.
is
Now, see,
unknown.
this technology was pioneered again not that long ago, but this was standard. And so it's funny to say, if you want to go back to that system, let's do it. In some ways, I kind of want to say yes, but I'm being facetious, because there are also mentally ill women too who chronically murder their husbands for other reasons too. So it's not
Right.
like anybody's innocent in this situation. But yeah,
But see, those situations as well could probably were compounded with abuse.
but not necessarily one-to-one relationship.
Hmm.
I'm not going to sit here and say that, they might have been abused by somebody else and then they're going to victimize innocent men. So I don't want to be sloppy
I
in
mean,
this, but
there was a husband poisoning society
that's
in
hilarious.
1879. A husband poisoning society. Let's see. In in 1879, a husband poisoning society was discovered in, I can't say it. It was in
Yeah.
Hungary. After 8 husbands in neighboring villages dropped dead within 6 weeks of one another, the police were forced to investigate. It was quickly established all 8 men died of arsenic poisoning, and their wives confessed to both killings and to helping each other carry carry out the crimes. In some cases, life insurance was collected, but for the most of the women, their motive was wanting out of unhappy marriage.
Yeah, so most marriages in 19th century Hungary, uh go back to um go back to where you were. Yeah,
Right? Yeah.
yeah, there, most marriages, right, in Hungary were arranged by bride's parents. Divorce was all but impossible. The law offered no protection from domestic violence, and even if the divorce could be obtained, it would result in the wife's financial ruination, social ostracization, and the loss of her children. But should a husband die, blah blah blah. Okay, so yeah, remember that even in modern America, divorce was still taboo
Hmm.
until versus Kramer came out. That's when you suddenly saw, you know what? Let's just have a no fault divorce. There wasn't anyone wrong. They didn't want to be married anymore. Do you remember the movie Kramer versus Kramer
Yep,
with
I remember that. I
Dustin
remember the
Hoffman
burning
and
bed
Meryl
too.
Streep? Huh?
The burning bed with Farrah Fawcett.
Oh, I don't
Well,
remember
she
that.
was
But
abused by her husband and she set him on fire in his bed while he
oh,
slept. And that was
Wow.
based on a true story.
okay. So, but Kramer versus Kramer, what 1981
Hmm.
is what finally made it okay and not taboo, where we would say, oh, yeah, she was divorced,
Hmm.
you know. So up until the 80s, it wasn't. It was, it women were unfairly targeted. You had to have beautiful Meryl Streep be the one who initiated divorce for it to
Well,
finally become
speaking,
okay.
well, remember the movie Heartburn? That was another one where Jack
Yeah.
Nicholson was like the shitty husband and got, it
Okay,
wasn't.
wait, hold on a second, Sharon. I'm trying to make a point. In both of those cases, the husbands were bad. In Kramer
Hmm.
versus Kramer, Dustin Hoffman was the good guy character. He didn't do anything bad. There was no reason for the divorce. The whole point, it was a no fault divorce, right? She wasn't saying he was abusive, terrible, or whatever. I
Uh-huh.
mean, that goes without saying. If there's abuse going on, then yeah, obviously you should get divorced. Okay? Even in the good old bad days, if you could finally prove that he abused you, then yeah, you could probably get a divorce. What I'm saying is that the taboo against just a normal innocent divorce was finally resolved through Kramer versus Kramer, because in that situation, again, nothing bad happened.
Right.
He didn't do anything bad to Meryl Streep. At one point, she just decided, I don't want to be in this marriage anymore. And she walked, and she wasn't vilified. No one was vilified. It was just about how emotionally painful it is, how difficult it is for the child involved, etc.
That was and that's kind of what the women, I was telling you that video I watched last night, where these women in South Korea are basically exclaiming the same thing. It's kind of like the whole country is like a Kramer versus Kramer type. Um,
Well,
but
yeah, because divorce is still extremely taboo in
mhm,
Korea. But again, think about it. Only up until the 80s, it was still taboo in America. In Korea, um, um, it's still common. For example, it might finally be starting to change, but it used to be that when you entered a corporation, if you got married and had children, you had to commit to quitting. So that was required on a lot of job contracts for women. Now, um, on the one hand, while that's oppressive, on the other hand, I think I don't know, I'm not speaking, but I'm thinking that from the Korean perspective, that was one of the ways in which they wanted to prevent the kind of situation that we see here today, where both parents are working, etc. Now, to me, this is an issue of capitalism, right? The fact that you now have to have both parents working. So, we used to live in a society where a one income home was sufficient to live a middle class life. But today, two income homes, it's still impossible to live. You have to have a two and a half income home now just to barely make it, right?
and that's
So
global. I
it's
mean,
becoming global, right?
mhm,
It's because now again, that didn't used to be. For example, in Korea, that's been a very recent thing too. Up until not very long ago, certainly it lasted for a lot longer. So in Korea and Japan, they have a different social contract. The
mhm,
idea was, if I give you a job, A, you can have it for life, but B, you're gonna have to work like a dog. But
mhm,
you are going to be able to be a single income home. I'm going to pay you enough that your wife can stay home, raise the kids, et cetera, et cetera. Now, um, while it's oppressive to suggest that the woman should stay home and raise the kids, I do think it's an inherent advantage to have a parent stay home.
mhm.
Now, this is a little bit more of a double take. In other words, um, we should get away from the oppressive one gender should do it, but at the same time, we do want to affirm that. So there's this movement called affluenza in rejection. Uh, like influenza as a disease, like affluenza as a disease. So a
Mhm, mhm,
movement against it is people, becoming more minimalist. So, for example, you've got a couple, two income house, two houses, two cars, two jobs, right? And then this couple decided, oh, what you could look up the documentary if you want on YouTube. It's free. Affluenza, based on a book. Um,
right.
you see this couple, and they realized 50% of their income was going towards paying off the car, its expenses plus daycare. So they said, well, whoever has the lower salary will quit, will get rid of one of the cars and become a homemaker. In this case, the husband had the lower salary. So the woman kept her job. They got rid of their second car. He started raising chickens in the back, and reduced their overall household expenses, etc. So in other words, they're rejecting modernity in a different way, but not um, in a depressive way, in a liberating way. So
Well, I want to play a little bit of this video. We'll play the whole thing, and I'm gonna fast forward a little bit of it. But I want to get I want you to pay attention to the attitudes of the guys, like the
it's at
the
30 minutes now.
huh? Oh, it is. Okay, we'll do part two. Hold on a second. This will
Okay.
be a part two. Hold on a second, and we will be right back.